joy? Like, what does it mean to be a joyful person? What does it mean to think about the fruits of the Spirit and the virtue of joy, the fruit of joy? What does that look like? And this is where I talk a little bit about what I think is going on, that, and this is another part where people are going to be like, hey, he's a little off his rocker. But I think that all of life is a game, and I think game studies actually helps us quite a bit. And this isn't simulation theory, like a bunch of people out there saying like, oh yeah, you know, it's all just a simulation and there's nothing to see here. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I mean is that it's a game designed by God with the purpose of His glory. And with very high stakes. And when I use the term game, I don't mean it in the way of like, oh, it's frivolous or unimportant. I think we use that for our understanding of game for a lot of things. But there are a few subsections in the way that I think about games, and I studied games a little bit when I used to teach at university. Games are, by definition, unnecessary. Right? Now, unnecessary doesn't mean frivolous, because there can still be value in it even if it's unnecessary. So games are unnecessary. They require a separate or sacred space. And I say sacred space importantly because I tie games to worship elsewhere. And if you're interested in what that might look like, I have a bunch of stuff posted on my blog. They create a separate space. They define rules for exploration, for play, and then they have a telos, they have an aim, they have a purpose. So, for instance, I look at a game like basketball. Well, basketball is completely unnecessary. I don't have to play. Nobody has to play. It has a separate space, the court. It has the rules for play, right? So you have the boundaries of the court, which actually enable play, which is something else that's interesting here. When we think of boundaries as being limiting, they are and they aren't. The limitation is what gives the space to play. So the rules and boundaries for play, and then there's a purpose. The purpose is to score as many points as I can to defeat the other team. So essentially, I am going to score as many as I can and keep the opponent from scoring as many as they can while playing within the rules. That's basketball. Now we could run through almost any game and it's going to have these four things. And now I look at creation, right? So here's a quick cosmology of play. Did God need to create anything? No, He has no need of anything. Okay, so it's unnecessary for Him to have created. That may be a slam to our pride, but it doesn't change the fact that it was unnecessary. Okay, so does it create a separate space? Well, yeah, He created time and space first, so that there would be a place to put all of the players and everything that He created. So He created space in order to place the universe into existence. He had to first create space and time. Okay, are there rules? There are tons of rules. There are moral rules like the moral law, but there's also the physical rules of what He has created. There's gravity and there's physics and all of those things that allow for us to play. And what I mean by that is, look, if I'm driving in a Tesla right now, and I'm so grateful to the Lord that I could afford this a couple of years ago and that I almost have it paid off. But the technology in this is insane. And it takes innovation and it takes play to be able to do that. But more than just human innovation, it takes a world system made by God that allows us to draw resources from that system, combine them in interesting and innovative ways to come up with new products and new technologies and new ways of thinking and new ways of looking at the world and new ways of being in the world. That's all play, and that's play enabled by the rules that God has put in place for the universe, because He ordered it in such a way that we can take its order and then combine and recreate and innovate and invent based on the rules that he has put in place. It is the biggest, most impressive survival game ever, if you want to put it in terms of like game design. But it's more than that, because it also provides the space for us to build other games and to build other worlds within it. And that's immensely important, because there are so many worlds. Like, every person who's in a car on the road right now, like, essentially has their own world. And I don't mean that to say that, oh, you know, each person is their own God. No, they're not. They have their own world, they have their own perspective, they have their own construct of reality that matches or doesn't match with what reality actually is. And where we meet is the playing field that is separate from us, where now those worlds can connect and we can start to communicate and interact in order to try to understand each other's worlds. And that is an incredible thing that God has done that is just overwhelming, right? So we've got the first three, right? We've got, he created space, right? Well, it was unnecessary. He created a separate space in order to allow for play. He designed rules and input them to allow for play. And then it has an aim, right? An aim or a purpose. And the purpose of this game of life that God created was for his glory. And people go, oh, you know, that seems selfish. That just seems selfish. But let's pause for a second. If you were to design a game, even 1/millionth as impressive as the universe that God has made, post it up on Steam or whatever, wouldn't you want the credit for it? Now, that's a little bit of a directional problem, which I talked about before, where I try to use like my perspective to put onto God. But at least you get a little idea. But God does this for his glory, for his Son. But it's not selfish for God to want to be most glorified, because he is the one who actually deserves the most glory. Period. In fact, for him to try to glorify anyone but himself, which he does in his Son and through the Spirit and in his people, but for him to actually glorify or uplift others than himself to the top of the pedestal would actually be dishonest, because they are not greater than he, and to put anyone as greater than him would be a problem. So those are the four kind of ways that I think, look, all of life is a game. But how does that tie back to this idea of joy? Well, when we start to realize that everything that exists was made by God with a playful purpose and unto his glory. And if you're still really not buying that there's a playful purpose here, right? There's a joyousness at creation. And God says that it's good, right? Tov. And that is something that we can't miss. If God was delighted to create, even though we live in a fallen world and that creates all sorts of problems for us, there is still delight in the world that he delighted to make. And if we don't see it, that's not a failure of God. And it's not a failure of the creation. It's our failure. Because we are not seeing the world for what it is. Now, when I say the world, I mean like the creation. Because obviously we have three enemies: the world, the flesh, and the devil. The world there meaning the darkened culture that is led by the prince of the powers of the air, that is led by Satan. That's the world, right? Worldliness is not about the creation as much as it is about the culture created by those who are of the kingdom of darkness. But the creation is good and beautiful and wonderful and revelatory of who God is. So next time you're considering being severe or somber or whatever else, you know, having this deep gravity or whatever, maybe start thinking about what are the ways that you can play in the world that God made and glorify Him in that process. And I think we do that when we invent. We do that when we have fellowship with one another. We do that when we cook an excellent meal for our family. Yes, it's necessary to eat, but it's not necessary for it to be flavorful. But it's so valuable that we get to play in that way and make it flavorful and delicious and excellent, and then connect over a meal with fellow believers. One last note here, though, is a game always has stakes. So in games of competition, the stakes have to do with, you know, winning and losing, largely. Maybe there are bets placed. With, you know, betting games, obviously the stakes are what you've put on the table. The stakes to life are extremely high. The stakes to life are life and death, and eternal life and eternal death. So the value of this game, of the game of existence, is significantly higher than any other game. And that's why I think sometimes we take it too seriously. Because the stakes are so high and we get worried, and when stakes are high, we freak out. At least I do. But next time you're thinking about just how high the stakes are in this game, just how high the stakes are in life, rather than getting a little bit concerned, it's an opportunity for faith. Because the God of the ages, who called you before the foundations of the world in Himself, doesn't let you lose the game. The Lord has placed all sorts of barriers in your path against losing if you are of His children. And ultimately, you will glorify Him. And He's promised that you'll glorify Him. So we as Christians should be more joyful and more playful than anybody in the secular world. By far. Because we are forgiven. And we know the game is won because Christ has won on our behalf. So where is your joy? What brings you joy? And what should bring you joy, but that you've forgotten about? That's all I've got for today. I gotta go to work. Traffic was less bad than expected. But God bless, and see you next time.